Some of you asked for it, the entire new workshop renovation as a single video. No placements, no ads, so you can truly binge watch it in one sitting. Here we go.
Welcome to my new shop. Yeah, there is quite a bit of construction going on at the moment, but I rented this place together with two other guys you maybe know, Stefan and Robin. And together we'll turn this place into a big, beautiful workshop for all of us to bring you more content. The decision of getting a bigger space for me was kind of inevitable. I ran out of space a long time ago and right now spend about a third of my time moving stuff around to get my projects done. It's ridiculous and has to stop. It's kind of a similar deal for the other two guys, but now with this place here, this will come to an end. And I try to cover as much of the construction as possible and the move into this shop here. I think let me just show you around and we'll see what's going on at the moment. What's already been done is the construction of a wall, because right here you could go into two other shops. This is a bigger building and two other businesses will move into these shops. Ours will end right here with this door probably being closed all the time. Then right here, this wall will be removed and a rolling gate will be installed. They already started on that. We'll also get a new entrance door. And here you can already see the wiring getting redone. This has to be done because previously this whole space with the other shops was owned by one company, and now the electrical wiring and stuff has to accommodate 3 different businesses. So yeah, it has to be redone completely. But this is all done by our landlord. So let's take a look at what else this space will offer. Here we will construct an office for all 3 of us. If we then move into the office, there's another room that will be our kitchen and kind of a space that's quiet to take a break in. Then if we move along here, we have our bathrooms and kind of another room that at the moment was kind of a kitchen, but we will get rid of this and do something else with this room. That's not decided yet. And down here we also have a basement. Unfortunately, there's no light working at the moment, but this is a huge storage space. I don't know how much you can see, probably nothing, but yeah, just lots and lots of storage space. What we'll do ourselves is dividing this whole shop space into 4 different smaller spaces, so 1 for each of us obviously, and then 1 shared space. But until this wall is gone and the rolling gate is installed, we can't really bring in materials to do that. The first thing we want to build is a wall that will separate the office space from the workshop space, because this being an office, it will obviously stay cleaner than the workshop, and cutting off that space from the heavy construction going on there is probably a good idea.
The first thing I made is a rough 3D model of the whole space so we could better visualize and plan what we want to build and where stuff is. And what you're going to start with is building this wall to separate the office from the rest. That began with a bit of deconstruction because there were some tiles that we needed to cut to the shape of the wall so it can be bolted to the concrete underneath. My brother-in-law and I positioned a laser at the exact position and then marked the shape of the tiles directly onto them with a Sharpie. He did the cutting, I was on vacuum duty. And then came the fun part, with me being very helpful. In my defense, I was still sick while we were doing that, and we only had one machine. I couldn't do anything else. There was also an unpleasant surprise underneath the tiles, which were other tiles, which we had to cut again quite a bit deeper and, yeah, a little painful, but okay. Then there was one great opportunity that I had to use. Then a little bit of cleanup of all the debris we created before we continued with leveling out the floor. The result was a nice and crisp edge of the tiles and a prepared floor. The last step here then was to fill all the little holes and the bigger holes from the tiles we had to remove with some leveling compound. Unfortunately, it was extremely loud that day and I couldn't really film much. But at least it was cool to watch the big saw for a bit that cut open the wall for the rolling gate. That really is a big machine which made a lot of noise.
But then with the leveling compound dry, we could begin building the office wall with an angled corner, door and window cutout. We ordered material for all walls we are going to build at once and got a big delivery right to the front door. Unfortunately, the rolling gate was still under construction at that time and we had to bring in every piece one by one. 350 meters of 60 by 80 millimeter construction lumber, 100 sheets of 18 millimeter OSB and about 100 square meters of insulation. That was a workout. I made a drawing with all necessary dimensions and we could begin positioning the crosshair laser to mark all locations on the floor, wall and ceiling. And if you wonder what's going on in the background, that's just Stefan drilling into the lock, because we didn't got any keys to change that. And here's the cross section of the wall. Construction lumber, OSB and drywall to end up flush on the outside. Now let's cut some lumber. And here I already screwed up the length. At least the piece just still fits and nobody will ever see it. But please don't tell anybody. On the long part I already marked the location of the door and partially cut through it. That will make sense later. For bolting the pieces to the floor, we pre-drilled the holes and put on some sealing tape. But then bolting to the floor turned out to be a nightmare. The plan was to just drill a hole and then use these special bolts that need no anchor directly in concrete. But they just didn't grip or we didn't have enough torque, and then with enough torque they eventually broke. No idea what we did wrong, because these bolts were sold for concrete with the matching drill bit. It was really strange. We then switched to these bolts with anchors and they worked great. Just drilling the hole, hammering it through the wood into the concrete and tightening it with some of the anchor remaining in the wood. That was super easy. But just getting these first pieces into the floor took 4 hours, with all the bolt struggle, buying new ones and other hiccups. At least during that time we could drill a hole into the basement to bring power and networking cables into the wall. But also that didn't went quite smoothly. We hit steel that kept a bit stuck for a while. But we got it back. Mounting to the ceiling then was much simpler, except there was a lighting panel in the way that needed to go as well. The wall-mounted studs were also simpler, using the same bolts and anchors as for the bottom. Then we could mark and measure all wall studs and cut them to length. Quick cake break and then mounting them one by one. Pretty simple actually, with 2 angle screws on top and bottom. From there, it was just a lot of repetitive work while making sure the cutouts for the window and door were sized correctly.
With that done, it was just a matter of adding the remaining short studs in between, and it's pretty cool how every piece adds a little bit of detail, making the wall look more and more finished.
The last step is to remove the part on the bottom for the door. With the cuts from before, there's no risk of cutting into the concrete and saving the blade. This also ensured that the bottom pieces line up perfectly, because mounting a long straight piece to concrete and then removing a section, everything will still be aligned perfectly. But first mounting one piece and then trying to align the second one perfectly to the rest is very hard when mounting to concrete. And that's the framing work done with the first sheets of OSB already mounted, which is the next job. Screwing OSB to the entire inside wall. For the most part, it's cutting big sheets to dimension, but there are also some places where a full sheet fits exactly. That's also how we chose our material dimensions. With the big 1.25 meter wide OSB panels and the 6 cm thick construction lumber at that spacing, you can buy insulation that fits this spacing perfectly. And in many cases you don't even have to cut it. Very cool time saver. We also didn't care about the window cutout, since it was much easier to just mount the full sheet and use the window cutout itself to guide the jigsaw for cutting the opening. And we did exactly the same for the door cutout. With most of the material gone there, I trimmed the cutout closer to the framing, since I could now see what I was doing. And the last bit of material I then flush trimmed with a router. What a dusty mess! Next time I will definitely wear my full face mask. I was covered. Shirt, face, even between my ass cheeks. I was still finding wood shavings under my shirt in the evening. At least the result was worth it. But that was the cool and easy part. Now it was time to get on the floor and cut sheets to size. I picked up some styrofoam to cut into, so I'm not worrying about cutting into the floor. And Robin could then screw them to the wall. Then the upper part at the ceiling. We didn't want to remove the entire old ceiling, since there was insulation underneath as well, and only did that inside the office. One by one I cut through the slats with a vibrating saw and ripped them off. Fortunately, the insulation stayed up. And with the slats gone, we could mount the OSB all the way up and close the gaps between the old ceiling and the construction lumber. Quite uneventful, but the difference when everything is mounted is huge. Starting to look like a wall. And Stefan is already starting with the drywall. But it was already late that day, so Robin and I finished that job the next day. And like the OSB, I then also flush trimmed the drywall to the window and door cutout.
There was also the perfect coincidence that we could mount a drywall sheet below the window, cut it flush, and the remaining sheet was the perfect size on top. It's the little things that turn a good day into a great day.
As you can see, we also put drywall against the ceiling to keep that insulation intact, but that was just painful. Working 3 meters up, every piece custom and limited options to put screws. So glad that's over. And the wall one step closer to being finished. Time for a well-deserved break for Robin and me. That's also a very good time to tell you who Robin is.
And conveniently, he's already wearing a microphone.
Hi, my name is Robin and I will be one of the 3 guys moving into this brand new shop here. And I'm super glad that I found those 2 nerds because I think I'm kind of the same category.
He means us 2 nerds.
Unlike Marius, I'm a little bit less in the heavy-duty metal and woodworking, style. I'm more the software and electronics guy, or overall product design fan, I would say. The last few years, I was occupied by making my very first commercial product, which is the Pixel Pump, and that's a small desktop vacuum pump for PCB assembly, which bridges the gap between having tweezers and a full-blown pick-and-place machine. And it combined all those things. I did the product design, software design, electronics, mechanical design, and all that, and I had a ton of fun. And before that project, I had a YouTube channel, or I still have, but I didn't make any videos in the last few years, and I'm very happy to have a brand new studio back there, which will allow me to make videos again. And I'm sure we will have a great time here because those 2 guys are really cool and I love working with them already. You can find me on YouTube and Twitter and you will find the links down in the video description.
I hope this can boost his Pixel Pump sales, but not too much. We need his time to finish the renovation. And who is Stefan?
Hey Stefan, who are you?
Yeah, I'm Stefan and many know me under the Guten Tag everybody, I'm Stefan. I have a channel called CNC Kitchen. I do tons of 3D printing stuff. If you want to know more about functional 3D printing, then check out my channel. I'm honestly really happy to be right here because I'm now starting to do this full time, and even though I still had a studio before, I would have turned crazy filming stuff and doing projects just by myself. I'm really looking forward to be here to have 2 other guys to toss around ideas and not turn crazy at some point. And one of the things I really want to have now is a functional studio.
But before the studio comes finishing the office wall, which continues with some electrical work. So placing outlets, that started out wonderful with the wrong size hole saw. Great. That meant an early lunch break and hardware store trip. At least this kind of thing only happened once. Yeah, just once. But this one is for the light switch. All the other outlets in the office we placed at a standard height 30 centimeters off the floor and one on top for networking stuff and lighting. The wiring will come together in this box, and right after finishing the cutout, we replaced it with a bigger one. Very good decision. Key takeaway from any electrical installation: use a bigger box. As I showed you in part 2 of this series, the whole power supply comes through a hole in the basement. But we quickly realized that one hole isn't enough. Now it should be fine. We then fitted all the cables through the studs and installed the empty outlet boxes and made photos of everything to know where not to drill or screw later. We also only ran cables horizontally or vertically and never diagonal. Here you can now see the power and networking cable going into the basement. And then we could start with the installation, where we bought Naturheld Flex 50 wood fiber insulation. And this stuff is very cool to work with. It's quite heavy, so excellent for noise dampening, not harmful and very stable in itself. As I mentioned previously, the stud thickness, OSB width and insulation width match up. So in many cases we didn't even have to cut it and could just push it in. Only cutting it is a bit unpleasant. A regular insulation knife works okay-ish, but tears out the surfaces quite a bit. Cutouts for outlets and such worked also great with just a knife, and you can easily rip out chunks for that. But for just cutting, we also tried the circular saw. Very effective actually. Only problem is that it didn't cut deep enough and we had to cut from both sides. The whole job was a continuous learning process, and a few weeks later we got a much better tool. The best would be of course a bandsaw, but my one wasn't there yet, so we just did the best with what we got, and that was really not too bad. So next is closing the outside with OSB. To leave room for expansion, we put down some highly professional spacers, little pieces of tile, about 8 mm thick. And we used that tile spacing at many more occasions. Whenever we needed a spacing, yeah, let's just go with the tiles. Just a very convenient free spacer. Mounting the OSB then was straightforward, and with a small practice from the inside wall, we were faster already. At the window and door cutout, we also again screwed just over it and cut it flush afterwards with the jigsaw and then a flush trimmed router bit. Then cutting the last pieces on top to size and the OSB is done.
Hold on.
Remember that we routed the cables at a 30 cm height, so where should you avoid to put screws? Yeah, that's me screwing right there. It was right about here. At least we caught it, opened the wall back up to check, and we missed it by just about a millimeter. Phew! Thank God we learned from this mistake, and this didn't happen at any other wall. Anyways, next comes the drywall, but that will be a topic of the next. Just kidding, we're doing that now. First, the easy full sheets at an offset to each other, and then all the rest cut to size. And here's how we did that. Marking the length from both sides, aligning a straight edge, and score the surface with a knife. Then breaking it and cutting through the back layer. Now straightening the cut surface, adding a chamfer with a knife and hoping it fits. Jackpot for this one.
Vergiss die Maßfliese nicht.
All in all, easy going, but if you have any tips on going faster, let us know. We would love to learn from your experience. We also flush trimmed the drywall, maybe unnecessary in hindsight, but it definitely was satisfying to look at, and the window fit was actually pretty tight. Last step before fill and plaster was fitting the outlets on the outside, and fishing for the cables we left there.
Ja, warte. Okay. Okay, wie viel haben wir noch? Du hast ja noch, oder? Ja. Das reicht auch schon. Das reicht schon. Schön. Ja. Okay.
Very happy with how everything has turned out so far. The plastering work we had then done professionally, because none of us had experience and we wanted that to look good, which it does. One evening I came in with my dad to install a window. We got that window for free, but had to pretty it up a bit and remove this part. That was a real workout. 5 minutes of continuous hammering is exhausting. Then to install a frame, we first had to remove the glass, which on this kind of window can be done by just wedging out the inner frame. Then we cleaned off the plaster from the edge a bit and prepared some spacers. Because the plan was to wedge the frame in the opening with spacers and screw it down from the inside. Quite possibly not the best way of doing that, but it's an indoor window, we had the screws, and that was quick. Without the glass, we could paint the wall the next day, and with the paint dry, I cleaned the glass and put it back in. But now there was still this gap between the window frame and the wall, so we removed it again to install sealing tape all around. Very good decision, that did a lot for noise dampening. And finally, we got the door installed by a professional, and that is the office wall complete. So with the office and lounge room now separate from the outside, it's now time to work on the inside, starting with some very necessary wallpaper work. Well, that's actually the old kitchen and bathroom, but still necessary, and Stefan did a pretty good job there. And it's amazing how much different the room feels with just a new wallpaper. But one corner in the actual lounge room also needed new wallpaper, and while preparing it, I came across the one thing we all love: rusty slotted screws. Just why? But then Stefan could go to work. Much better as well, and we can move on with painter's tape. And for the paint in this room, we went with a light gray, so mixing just a little bit of a dark, almost black color into a bucket with white.
Stopp, 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 stopp. Es soll nur leicht grau werden.
This single bucket was more than enough for 2 coats on the whole walls, and painting was a nice family activity because I did that together with my sister, brother-in-law and my 2 nieces. And of course, when there's a camera, shenanigans will happen. But besides that, it turned out pretty well and we're all happy with the result.
The next day then, I could prepare the corner with the new wallpaper, because we will turn that into a small kitchen and it's gonna be a dark gray. Weird problem there, 3 different brands of painter's tape and nothing wanted to stick. So frustrating. The 4th attempt then kind of worked and was just sticky enough to paint over. And I first painted over with the light gray again to backfill the tape and get sharp edges. Let's see if that worked.
Oh yeah, pretty nice.
Alright, now the office and the ceiling. We discussed a few ideas, but in general wanted an interesting looking ceiling with wood that's not too expensive. Considering the amount of time spent in the office, we wanted to do a good job there, and the wood we had a lot of is OSB. So we settled with suspended OSB panels with a recessed spotlight in each for lighting and a dark color as background. I made a rough model to visualize and adjust dimensions, but then we went to work with our most favorite work of all time, painter's tape.
Because painting the ceiling dark is the first thing that needs to happen. Not that exciting to be fair, but it needs to happen to achieve the look we want.
We put a laser up high because part of the wall should also be dark. And I again painted white over the tape for the sharp edges, and this will also make painting the walls afterwards easier. I guess you know what's coming now. Dark paint through the ceiling. and the ceiling is dark, with me finishing the last details here. It looks so easy, but Robin and I had very sore muscles the next day. At least we were rewarded with this. You can also see that we already painted quite a bit of white under the tape, and that's so we didn't need to be as careful with the remaining white walls. And it's always amazing what a difference freshly painted white walls make. Everything feels bright and new and bigger. With the painting done, we could make the OSB panels. And a size that worked well with our material dimensions was 1 by 1 meter. Because with a full sheet being 1.25 by 2.5 meters big, we could cut 2 panels from one sheet. The long offcut was useful later for building the shop walls, and the small offcut also had a use. And so we went to work with the track saw on some styrofoam. First the long strip, then a panel from each side, and repeat. Like this we could mark everything up front on the pallet, align the saw track, and cut. After like 4 sheets, we worked together like a good team, and the 28 panels were done in less than 2 hours. Next question was how to suspend and mount the panels to the ceiling. With over 10 kilos per panel, it had to be solid. And suitable material we already had was our construction lumber from the walls. And so we went with 2 thicknesses as distance and made the simple construction. 3 pieces screwed together with 1 mounting screw each. Simple, solid, and room for cable management. This thickness is also what we used for the dark paint on the wall. Those suspension pieces only needed to be mounted relatively precisely at the right location on the ceiling. So for that I made a drawing with all necessary dimensions, set up a crossline laser parallel to the wall. Well, as parallel as possible, because no walls ever are truly straight and square. And marked all the drill locations for the suspending construction. It did help a lot to use the same reference for each measurement. As you can see on the drawing, it's this corner, or rather these 2 walls in the office. And then a distance laser while I'm on the ladder. Then 1 hole. And impact dowel for each. Time for production, making all the suspending construction. And marking, drilling, and mounting everything to the ceiling. Once that was done, it got more and more clear that this ceiling is more effort than we anticipated. Because next we had to paint the construction lumber dark as well, because you can see it from some angles. So while I was busy painting, Robin could mount the cable channels for the lights. Every panel got a junction box for the light and also normal power. More on that later. The white cable supplies power to the junction, and then the next panel, the black cable, is for the spotlight. Once all that was done, we could tidy the office up and bring in the first panel. It got a centered hole for the spotlight, and we also marked the mounting screw locations. Now I set up the crossline laser again to the spacing of the first panel. And seriously, without that laser, we wouldn't have done this ceiling. Robin could hold it up and thread in the light cable. I clamped it lightly in place, and we could hammer it into position. Looking pretty good so far. For the mounting screws we made a complex jig. A stick for a mark. And screwed it down, up. 1 up, 17 to go. For the second panel, we didn't move the laser and only used one laser line and a distance block, because setting up the laser takes time. So our whole strategy was to move the laser as little as possible, mount the 3 corner panels, and then move the laser to the next corner for those 3 panels. We had marks on the wall to get the laser at the same position again, and a classic road sign on the opposite side. Pretty useful actually, since it's big and very reflective, so easy to see when the laser touches the edge. Robin and I also started playing a game. Guess the panel center for the hole. This is him. This is me. The target is 50 centimeters from each side. I'm basically spot on in this direction, but way off in this direction. In total, Robin is closer to the actual center, but we got better and better with each panel. From there, it was very repetitive. And for the 4 center panels, we didn't need the laser anymore and could rely just on the distance blocks. The 2 panels in the back were then again mounted with the help of the laser, but to get the diagonal nicely accurate, we used a nicely sketchy setup. Saw track clamped to the panels. I got covered in dust, but it worked beautifully. We are very happy with the result. Everything is nice and accurate, a comfy feeling for the office, exactly what we wanted. But now an important question. Is there a triangle missing? Leave your opinion in the comments. Installing the lights now was rather simple. I mean, see for yourself. Just repeating it 17 more times. Lights on. We went with 10 watts per bulb at 4000 Kelvin temperature. It's all evenly bright without a single dark spot. Perfect for the office. Now what I said about the power cable. We ran a 3-phase cable from the light switch up the wall to the ceiling, but not hooked up to 3-phase power. Because at first we thought about having a double light switch and divide the lighting into 2 groups, which we didn't end up doing. But the 3rd phase in the cable, hooked up to single-phase power, is now an easy option to install an outlet on every panel. Say we want to install a projector here against this wall or a fan here. The OSB is an easy mounting option and an outlet can be installed at every panel with little effort. For example, one of our Wi-Fi hotspots is hidden on a panel without any wire mess. Hopefully it's future-proofed enough, because installing this whole ceiling with paint and everything took us about 1.5 weeks. We now can say it was worth it, but then again we did the same thing again in the launch room. Really unimaginable without the cross-lined laser. But also there, worth it. Now it's time to finish the 2 rooms by installing the floor and the kitchen. Our decision was carpet with laminate underneath, which seems pretty weird, but let me explain. The bare concrete was pretty level and clean to begin with, except for a few places where we cut the tiles at the beginning and where a few floor outlets were installed. And leveling the entire area would have been pretty expensive, with the leveling compound being 25 euros per square meter, the whole area being 60 square meters, that's 1,500 bucks just for leveling, and without even knowing how thick the layer needs to be. But the main reason was heat insulation, because the bare concrete with basement underneath is cold. With laminate, we could put a 5mm layer of insulation underneath, which is a little bit of heat insulation and levels out the remaining spots good enough. Insulation and laminate together was less than 10 euros per square meter and about 12mm thick, which we also needed to get to the tile level again. So perfect for our situation, and so we went shopping. Floor and food.
This was actually one of the first decisions and purchases. As you can see from the construction site, there was nothing done yet. No walls built, everything is a mess, Just us and our material.
Impressive to see the weight of the whole flooring. Well, and then we just started. It's a simple, pretty common interlocking click system. Just the beginning is a bit painful when it's still too light and shifts all the time.
Grad rein, runter, hinlaufen, oder?
So we put the first two lengths together, kind of piece by piece, while figuring out a strategy for the next section. Eventually we got the first bit in with 5 to 10 millimeters gap to the wall. From there we could pre-assemble the next section, cut some of the weird shaped pieces and click it in. Closing the gaps all the way then worked great with a small offcut and a hammer. Yep, that camera is recording. Here another section in detail. Assembling the boards, marking the length of the last board, and cut it with the jigsaw. I used a metal cutting blade because it leaves no tear out behind. And the offcut from cutting to length is the beginning of the next section, which ensures the seams to never align and be spread randomly. That's the process. In the door frame, we left a gap to the office floor because the two rooms might have different temperatures and humidities and thus will expand differently. Once the launch room was done, we did the same again in the office. Basically all the same, but with a great view from the ceiling. The last bit is again painful, because there you have to cut every piece to width and make weird cutouts everywhere. At least we now had enough experience already to get it on the first try.
Ah, der Kamera ist früher eingeschaltet.
Das war wohl nichts.
Cut that out. No. Like I said, first try. And done.
Sehr gut.
While it's very cheap flooring, it turned out pretty nice. But don't get used to it, because next Stefan and Robin installed the carpet. But who didn't record anything of that?
We didn't.
So who's disappointed that they couldn't see the process?
All of the viewers.
Well, we have 3 photos. But they did an excellent job. We used double-sided tape and it sticks perfectly fine. Really nice and incredible how much it reduced the echo. Stefan then did all the trim work. And I installed the transition profiles in the doors.
Nice.
With the laminate and carpet, we are now at the same level with the tiles, so there's no step. There's also one between the office and the launch room. And a third in the launch room for the kitchen area. There's a little bit of a height difference, but there are also profiles for that case. We got tiles installed at the kitchen area, and the kitchen itself is relatively new, but used and was free. Came with a working stove and fridge, and we bought a new dishwasher, sink, and countertop. Just getting water and power to there was a bit of work. The water part was done together with the new toilets, because the kitchen is directly behind this wall. For the power, I had to drill 2 holes to the basement. First one done and inspected.
Da kommt ja die halbe Decke mit.
And damn, did the second one turn out nice and parallel to the first one. Kind of proud of myself here.
Up there now go 4 cables, 1 3-phase and 3 single-phase. And they come together here in this sub-distribution box with a fuse for each and its own RCD. The 3-phase supplies the stove, which is totally normal in Germany. The first single-phase is for warm water, because there we use an instantaneous water heater, and that draws 3.5 kilowatts by itself, so it needs a whole single phase. The second one is this one, supplying the dishwasher, and the third one is for these 3 outlets, coffee maker, finally. It's obviously not 100% finished, but a nicely functional kitchen. We of course also already got a table to sit at and the classic fruit basket.
The last job before calling these rooms finished is shortening the door to accommodate the added floor thickness.
Damn, so close.
Yeah. Wow, a lot of work went into these 2 rooms, but we made ourselves a nice little space that we like to work in.
Here we have Robin's desk and setup in the office. This is Stefan's. And here's mine. Beautiful.
Yeah, it's temporary. And with that done, we could start building the shop walls. To bring you back on track, this is the whole shop space that we divide into 3 individual studios. So every one of us has its own space to work and film in. Stefan's, Robin's, mine, and a share space connecting them. We began with the framing of Stefan's space, and that started with cleaning a bit. Then we started laying out the first wall, which is this little bit here. For the office wall, I made a relatively detailed model, and the experience from building that wall had us confident enough to just start with this one as the workflow stayed the same. But since it had 2 corners, we placed little dummy studs to be sure with our measurements. The stud spacing is again based on the material dimensions we got to minimize the amount of cuts we have to do later with the insulation and OSB. The bottom part gets bolted to the floor, so we pre-drilled the holes in the wood and attached the insulation tape. Then drilling through the tiles. We didn't know how strong they were and if they would crack, so we started out without hammering, which is very slow. So then we tried the small hammer drill. That worked without cracking the tile, so Robin could mark all hole locations with that, and I drilled the actual hole with the big hammer drill. The depth we need is about 1 screwdriver length. The impact dowels get hammered in and screwed down.
And don't forget the kick. Yeah, that's going nowhere.
Rinse and repeat for the other 2 floor segments. And a screw through the corner for good measure. Next, we aligned the laser with the outer edge to transfer marks to the wall and ceiling. The ceiling parts went up pretty much the same way, except we didn't unclamp and drilled the mounting holes through the pilot holes into the ceiling. And pretty cool, that ledge right there was exactly 1 stud thickness, so easy to integrate into the framing. Then the wall-mounted studs. This wall here is brick and hollow most of the time, but the impact dowels still had a strong grip. They weren't cheap, but they are good. Now the studs can go in. We measured each length with the laser.
Wendelin.
Cut.
Hammered them in place and screwed them secure with 2 diagonal screws on top and bottom. And for the corners, we built a California corner as suggested by a viewer. So there's meat everywhere to screw the USB panels later. That's the first framing done, and with the 2 corners, one of the more complicated ones, here again in super speed. The second wall was one of the simplest, pretty short and no corners. So we marked everything with the laser, prepared the parts and started mounting them. But on a construction site, this also happens from time to time. Someone tripped the RCD. It's annoying, but at least it's working. Everything else was uneventful and the framing was done in no time. Now going from simple to more complicated again is this next wall coming from this post to this post with 2 corners and a door cutout. It's the trickiest to get straight and square, but we have a method. First of all, we took 2 of the straightest pieces we had and cut them to the same length. Then we used both of them and the 2 other pieces to form a rectangle on the floor. I could measure the 2 diagonals with the laser and adjust the pieces until they were equal. Like this, everything is in position and I could mark the corners onto the floor. Stefan could make his final decision on the door placement, so I could cut it halfway through the bottom rail. This way the rail can stay in one straight piece and it's easy to remove the cutout later. With the crossline laser, I could transfer the marks to the ceiling and wall. Then it's the same work as before, with drilling holes into the floor and mounting the bottom rails. Then the top rails with some small challenges because of other stuff at the ceiling. And then the first studs into the wall, or in this case, the posts. For the other studs, we started with the corners and the ones for the door. Quick check if everything's straight. Looks good. All the other studs went quickly as we had some practice now.
That's a bit too short.
Well, ignore that one. Looking good so far. And next is the header, which we just screwed in from the sides. I think we should have put in some trimmer studs, but since none of these walls is carrying any load from the top, it doesn't really matter. But next, 2 cripple studs go on top. Last step here is to cut away the bottom piece, and that framing is done. Stefan seems to be happy about it. Time for a break. The next wall is a simple straight section again, dividing Robin's and my workshop. It's kind of all the same thing again, and I possibly recorded way too much of that, but here it is. Some pieces against the wall also needed a little bit of a custom shape to seal properly. And another easy wall section is at the front of my workshop. The only tricky part here was that we couldn't mount a wall centered against a post, because on top is a steel beam and we couldn't mount the top rail there. Guess how we found out?
Passt.
Everything else was again straightforward. Unfortunately, the sunlight ruined the time-lapse footage a bit, but I guess you can imagine how it went. There are some more walls we need to frame, but first some OSB. Stefan's studio needs to be finished first, so we are starting there. And there's not much to say about it. Take a sheet, raise it off the floor a little bit, and screw it to the studs. Compared to the office wall, this is now a lot faster, since for the most part we can use full sheets. You can also see the laser aligned with the middle stud, which shows us where to put screws. Here we tried recording a motion lapse. That's not as simple, because we had to guess correctly how long it would take us to mount the OSB. First one, you can definitely see that it failed. But that first wall didn't start out straightforward with the corner. We mounted a full sheet overlapping the corner, then another one to the other side, and then cut it flush. And anytime we couldn't use a full sheet, we marked the width on both ends on the pallet. Aligned the saw track. And cut it right there. Like that, we made good progress. But as you can see, the sheets are not high enough, so we had to fit some thinner strips against the ceiling to close the wall. Here again in a more successful motion lapse. What you can also see are some ceiling strips we put at edges against the walls and ceiling. Because nothing is perfectly straight, that tape fills some of the small gaps and significantly reduces the amount of caulking we need later. We let it overlap a bit and cut it flush afterwards. Next wall, and here we nailed the motion lapse timing. The door cutout we made like the one in the office wall, screwing OSB over it and used the frame as a guide for the saw to cut it flush.
Muss abreißen.
Looks pretty much like a wall now, just the strips on top are missing. Now back to framing the arch in my workshop. One rail on the floor, which was a little bit bent, two against the wall, and one on top. And three more short pieces against the arch and connected to the top rail made it a lot stiffer. To get the OSB panels into shape, Robin could hold it against the arch and I could fit behind to transfer the shape. That worked excellent, so covering the entire wall with OSB didn't take long. And now the last wall we had to frame was the one into my workshop with door cutout. And it's more involved, since my plan is to build a big sliding door for it. And to be able to support the weight of it hanging there, I planned it a lot stronger.
Also about halfway, Robin's wall with door joints and connects my wall with Stefan's. It's also not centered in the post, but the OSB should end up flush with one outside, and that's what we are trying to mark on the floor here. The same on the other post as well, and these marks can be transferred to everything else. Then I again found some nice and straight pieces for the bottom and top rail. Everything else you've seen multiple times already, so I won't show it again. Here now is the beam that the sliding door will be mounted to, and to make it nice and strong so it can support the weight of the sliding door, it got studs all the way through, and I also doubled it.
Not so much for strength, but to have more area to bolt the sliding door rail into. Also trimmer studs, of course. And despite all that, it's still very wobbly. Well, it's also not finished. Cripple studs got installed and Robin's wall with the door cut out as well. It connects both Stefan's and my wall, and with it finished, everything is solid. And now all the framing is complete.
Ready to do?
Fast. Since Stefan's studio is the first we have to finish, the work continues there, with him flush trimming the corner and door frame. Off camera, we filled in the screw holes and other small imperfections, and the next day, Stefan went over everything with the belt sander. And while he was busy sanding, Robin and I could close up the next walls with OSB. The front wall in my shop and the one between Robin's and my shop. And right after that, we installed cable channels to supply everyone with power. There's also one running into Stefan's studio. In fact, there are 4 big channels spreading out from the main breaker panel into all parts of the whole shop. Time to install some outlets, starting in the arch wall. With the laser, it's a breeze getting them to equal heights. On the other side, we hooked them all together and prepared another cable near the bottom for some outlets outside. Then some insulation. Pretty straightforward. And then closing the wall with OSB cut to the right shape. We could do that in the same way as inside, using the existing arch to mark the shape onto the OSB and cut it with the jigsaw. Watch close here. Maybe you see our fatal mistake. No? I'll show you in a second. Now, they're running cables through the wall now, and I placed the screw right there. And the whole day, I wasn't sure if we hit a cable. Only way to find out, open the wall back up, and so we did. And sure enough, it got punctured. Thank God, I checked. But let's see how bad it actually was. Here was the screw. Let's look inside. And it looks like we would have gotten away with it. None of the actual cables is punctured or damaged. But even though, without checking, I wouldn't have slept well anymore. I assure you, after almost hitting a cable in the office wall and now hitting one, we learned our lesson where not to put screws. It didn't happen again. And after the office wall, you told us in the comments we should have used protective steel plates to prevent exactly that. But when that video came out, this accident now had already happened. Back to Stefan's studio, where he could now place his outlets that we then hooked up on the outside again. Then again, insulation. And finally, we upgraded our insulation knife.
Hey Marius, stop that shit. Oh, yeah.
What a joy! So fast and clean. Custom shaping is now also much simpler.
Nice.
But sometimes a sawing motion with a bigger stroke than the jigsaw helped a lot. Actually, it was just me doing it wrong. A week later it worked like a charm, but for now you have to look at me doing it like a fool. For closing the wall with OSB this time, we tried mounting the full sheet against the ceiling first and then the smaller strip against the floor. I had to hold the sheet up until the first screw went in, but the strip at the floor didn't need to be as accurate and overall was a lot faster. Well, at least for the most places. One kind of a last-minute decision was to construct another wall against the existing one to our neighbor for noise insulation. That did help, but since it wasn't planned, we had to order some more lumber. Once done, Stefan could go to work painting. Mostly white and a few dark sections. Followed by some caulking.
Die schaut schön aus. Die kannst du mit reinnehmen.
Next job then was flooring. Stefan wanted a warm and cozy atmosphere and went with cork flooring. A friend of mine stopped by to help out with that. And then he also helped Stefan move in his setup. And that is his studio now, more or less finished. A nice place to work and film in. Well, except for the door, which we are starting with now. Both Stefan and Robin ordered the same double door. It came in its individual pieces, and first you need to glue the inner and outer frame together. But maybe it's wise to double check the fit in the walls.
Who measured that?
I'm guilty. I'm guilty.
It was him.
But I already fixed it.
Well, Robin read 210 centimeters instead of 201 from the given dimensions. Luckily, this screw up was an easy fix. The header is now 9 centimeters further down and Robin double checked. Just imagine the pain if it was the other way. Back to prepping the door frames. The total height was without a cork flooring, so we removed a small section, which was easier than a clean cut on the frame pieces.
Steht zwar eine Anleitung, wie so angelegt, da drüber gezogen.
Then the frame goes in.
Oh, ich bin ein bisschen. Achso, wir sind ein bisschen enger, oder? Wir wollen ja ein bisschen raus. Also das muss ja.
Small blocks to fill in the gap, and a bunch more measuring and aligning before fixing it in place.
Nochmal, also das haben wir oben, das brauchen wir natürlich dann auch unten. Dann schau ich mal, höchstens machen wir noch dünneren rein. Zieh ich an. Anziehen? Du brauchst gar nicht so fest anziehen. Ja, also. Turm verdecken.
3 clamps for the sides and 1 for the top, so it doesn't sag under the expanding foam. But before that, we quickly installed the hinges.
Bis es knackt.
Okay, Stefan, now shake that foam. Applying it is actually very simple. And Stefan, do it again for Robin's door. Premium foam expanding conditions in beautiful sunlight. After curing, we cut it flush and installed the frame from the other side, which just got pressed in.
So, jetzt muss es kippen. Vorsicht, komm.
Now the doors. And Robin, please do a clean opening. beautiful. Unsurprisingly, the doors were rubbing on the cork floor, but that's okay, we expected to cut it shorter because of that. Of course, also adding the bottom chamfer again.
Schon?
No more floor rubbing. Good.
Schleift nix.
Another necessary modification was elongating the slot for the locking pin.
War ja klar.
So I set up a fence on the router and carefully went to work. Stefan then found the right closed position. I pressed the pin down, dropped the camera,
Ja. Ja, perfekt.
and marked the spot. Right there, he could then mount the steel plate that the pin engages with and keeps the second door closed. Same for the top. And there, the door is complete. You could also already see the transition rail from the cork to the tiles, which Stefan installed before. For Robin's door it was all the same again, but here I also filmed the final touches of trimming the ceiling strips to length. You may also notice the timeline isn't really consistent anymore, because in some shots there was flooring installed and in the next one it was gone again. Well, if I had stuck to the actual order stuff was done, it would have been 6 boring episodes about building walls, which nobody wants, and then stuff all over the place making no sense. So I rather don't care about the actual timeline and try to focus each episode on a more or less different topic to keep them interesting and not too repetitive. But unfortunately that's hard editing wise, even with the videos being quite short, because I just recorded all the time and now the footage is more than a month old and all over the place. So finding a new topic or story gets harder every week. I'm not complaining, but it shows the extent of this huge workshop project, and it will be very cool to look back on it in a year or so and see the beginning again. Now let's finish Robin's shop with insulation. The new jigsaw insulation knife didn't do as well as expected, with me having to do this. I wonder why that is. A different saw worked much better. Why? Looking at the saw base on here, it's closer to the blade, supporting the material better, and here is a big gap. So I quickly made a zero clearance plate for my saw. That worked a lot better. But what helped even more was cutting the insulation from their bottom side. One surface didn't tend to rip out, and with it on the bottom. Just look. Now it was fun and quick, so I insulated my shop right after Robin's in record time. Then one last time covering everything in OSB. Next, Robin could install all his light panels. While mounting the first ones, the printers were busy printing the remaining fixtures. And as you can see, he went with a dark ceiling. Everything hooked up and lights on. Nice and bright, perfect for installing the caulk flooring next. Well, and then he could start moving in.
And that is his current shop now. Nothing is final and he has pretty cool plans with it, but for now it's set up to produce and ship his own product, the Pixel Pump.
And with Robin's shop done for now, we can move to the lighting installation in my shop. Very important topic for me, since I'm not only working in here, I'm recording video in here. And I have additional requirements. I want it evenly bright everywhere and the same light temperature. So what I'm going to be using are light panels.
21 of them.
And I had an interesting idea for mounting them, kind of invisibly.
I didn't quite like the way Stefan and Robin did it. They mounted them with a 3D printed clip in each corner, which means 4 well-aligned holes per panel, and you can't really adjust anything afterwards. Since I installed 21 panels, I didn't want to drill that many holes into the ceiling. So here's the design I came up with, and you can safely say it escalated. The idea basically was to have a backing plate behind every panel that houses all the components so they are organized and hidden away. That being the power supply and a little power distribution box. And then to hang the panel from the backing plate, I would have 4 pieces of rope attaching to each corner of the panel, which are adjustable in length, and so I can adjust the height of the panel precisely. And then I thought, why not make this rope attachment a 3D printed winch? Yeah.
That's the design. What a stupid idea to make this 21 times, but without executing it, you never know if an idea is stupid, so let's get to work. The material for the OSB panels are actually offcuts from the office ceiling panels.
I brought them all into the shop and cut them into roughly oversized squares. So many squares. Then at the CNC router, I only needed to position them roughly. The first pass is the chamfering, which will make sense in a minute, and spotting the holes for the power supply and breakout box. Tool change to cut the outer shape, and the little pockets for the winches. Having the chamfer made first meant there's no tear out when cutting the outer shape, because all the little wood fibers are well supported. Once done, I could hammer off the waste and flush trim everything with this chamfer bit. And now, repeat. In the meantime, the 3D printer was busy printing all the winches. But the final design took a few iterations to work every time and is easy to assemble. When you have to do it almost 100 times, every detail becomes important. Time for assembly. Mounting the winch bodies. Then the breaker box and power supply. "21 times, of course.
Now for actually hanging the lights, I'm using a nylon rope with a little 3D printed hook. From the spool I can tie a simple knot. Put a hook in the loop and pull it tight.
This way, the knot will pull itself tight under tension.
And then cut it with an electric lighter. This will seal the ends at the same time.
Here again, from my point of view, in real time. So many hooks. Two screws in the table was a great jig for cutting to equal length.
Now you can grab a spool and thread the cord through the little hole. Tie a knot at the end. And it's secure.
Throwing them in a box was a fatal mistake, but past me will find out soon. In now go a washer and set screw with grease. Then the pulley and a little bolt where the bolt head is used as the axis on this end. It was going well for a while, but eventually all remaining pulleys tangled up into a big knot, which was great fun to take apart again.
Alright, next I need to mark the layout on the ceiling, and for that I made a drawing with all the dimensions.
Everything uses this corner as reference, so I set up a crossline laser equal distant to the wall and marked the hole positions with a distance laser. And I had a great setup for some offset from the ceiling. I then only needed to drill one center hole for each panel. And with the oversized hole in the OSB, I had some front to back and rotation adjustability. That's done, now come cable channels for wiring. That was straightforward, as well as the wiring itself. It just took way longer than anticipated. In the non-branching panels, I could use these type of Vago clips. And in the branching ones, the quintuple ones. Now the panels.
Now the cables come out the side of the panel, but I need them to go up like this. So I 3D printed a little clip that hooks on here, cable in here. Done. Unfortunately, the panels don't have an obvious mounting option, so mounting some more of the nylon cord. And these screws are perfect for that. Something in between, so there's still a little bit of slack. That looks good. And then cutting it off. Then up at the ceiling, just hook in the first two, plug in the cord, and hook in the other two. Done. Alright, now all panels are up, except the two with the light switch cable, and that's the last step before turning them on.
Since it was already hooked up to the RCD, I couldn't just cut it, but had to splice it open and cut each wire individually.
Woohoo! Nice! Bright! Finally! What a difference! Just gotta do it again. Lights on. Yeah. Okay, and with it now nice and bright in here, I can adjust all of the panels to the same height.
Right now they are all wonky and at random heights. For that I printed 4 little brackets that I could stick to each panel. Then I set up a laser line high up and could adjust each corner until the laser hit the white. And now everything is nice and neat.
But the question now is, was it worth all this effort and would I do it again like this? Yeah, well, I love the way it turned out, how clean it looks and how everything is nice and neatly aligned. But yeah, it was definitely more time consuming than Stefan's and Robin's installation. I think I wouldn't do it again like this. But it was an excellent exercise and experience in terms of designing for mass production and optimize the workflow for machining and save time during assembly. Problem is, I just can't translate that in the video. It was just a nice experience for me. So yeah, now I know all that. But what I also learned is a lighting installation like this is time consuming. Wow! Just the installation of all the parts. So marking the positions, drilling, electrical stuff and wiring and aligning the panels took about 1.5 days. I greatly underestimated how long that would take. Maybe it really takes that long, or I'm slow, but I don't know, whatever.
Now it's nice and bright. And with almost everything done, it's a good time to look at some of the little jobs like the networking installation. We needed to bring multiple networking cables from our switch in the basement through the cable channels into the workshops. That needed summer holes through the floor under the electrical panel. Stefan drilled and I watched out because the safety margin is small. And of course, with Stefan in the same building, there are 3D printers everywhere. That went great, but we needed more than one hole. 4 holes in total, and we could start with the cable.
Which company?
Feeding it through the holes, and then all cable channels.
Good.
Then crimping into the outlets. And thanks Stefan for all the subtitle work.
Ich bin mir zwar sicher, dass es andere wie immer besser wissen, aber zumindest habe ich schon ein paar Netzwerkdosen gepatcht, die dann auch funktioniert haben. Jetzt legt man hier diese Kabel ein. Dann hast du hier ein Werkzeug, das hat da hinten auch eine Klinge dran. Damit schiebst du quasi das Kabel rein und schneidest gleich automatisch hinten nur ab. Was irgendwie ein geiles Werkzeug ist. Wenn du halt irgendwie so ein komplettes Patchfeld mit 500 Netzwerkkabel machst. Kommt die einfach hier rein. Das Werkzeug einfach runterdrücken. Mich würde es mal interessieren.
Looking forward making the subtitles.
Alles das ganze Deutsche. Mich würde es mal interessieren. Man kann die durchmessen mit so einem schweinsteuren Gerät.
And he continues to make my life harder making subtitles.
Das ist, was ich gern mache.
Okay, that's mounted with a missing cover and will feed an Wi-Fi access point. Back in the basement, hooking it up.
Also wir sind teilweise vollkommen overequipped. Scheiß Spitzzange, das ist nicht so geil.
We needed to tape it to another cable to pull it through.
So ein Dreck. Viel Spaß beim Untertiteln.
Success. No success.
Straße. Gut.
First one done, time for the next. In total, one cable for every shop and one for the access point. Next job is cleaning this storage room. It was in great condition, being dry and insect-free, but after, I don't know, 20 years, one deep clean seems reasonable. First, I made even more dust with installing a cable channel. And then I tried to systematically go from shelf to shelf. We pulled the first one away so I could clean behind and under it, and since it was never secured to the wall, I drilled several holes for that as well. I vacuumed every single shelf board and wet wiped them as well. Then moving everything to the left shelf so we could move the middle one and clean underneath there. And with more space, I also vacuumed all boards, but no wet wipe this time. Mopping the floor looks pretty cool sped up, and here you can watch the floor drying. Spectacular! Pulling the middle shelf to the other side and the left one away for all the same treatment, including mounting holes for the wall. All done. Everything is nice, clean, secure, dehumidified and ready to be filled. And here are the interesting findings. Some shelving boards, a ruler, a funnel with price tag, a packaging of a rubber duck, okay, and this one. Electric fence wire, also with the original price tag, which is the old German currency, 19 Deutsche Mark and 90 Pfennig. Cool, and a bunch of lumber. Now the last job is really small. Setting up this utility sink for washing paintbrushes or similar. And it wouldn't even be interesting, but then this happened. So we couldn't use the faucet that came with the sink, because we want to connect it to this water heater, and so we need a low pressure unit. I got one, and look at that. This doesn't fit right here. So I turned this aluminum ring to raise the platform up a bit and come above this ledge here. I'd say a valid solution for this weird problem. Now it's time to get fresh air into the workshops. Since none of the rooms has any windows, it's necessary to install a central ventilation system. And it was actually the first purchase we made after signing the contract for the rent. And you might even have spotted the big box in the background, so time to open it.
Hast du da natürlich die Installationsebene, gell? Weil hier ist nämlich gar nichts, dann wollen wir den mal voll drauf.
I'm so helpful.
Mods Teil also.
We bought a unit from Reventon with 800 cubic meters capacity, which is a bit more than we needed, but we got a very good deal on it. And it's got everything we needed. Most importantly, a heat exchanger, so the warm air in the winter stays mostly warm and inside, and hot air in the summer stays mostly outside.
Smart control.
So let's fire it up. The only way to test the airflow is this. The machine will hang up there in the corner, and we need 2 big holes that our neighbor could drill for us. Next, marking and drilling the holes for the threaded rod ceiling anchors, for which we used steel ones that are actually required. In case of a fire, plastic ones could melt and the machine would drop down. Doesn't happen with the steel ones. Our other neighbors then helped us hanging it up. The machine is not too heavy, about 75 kilos, but it was good to have 4 people for this. Looks like the whole alignment is spot on. The outside pipes will be cold and need to be insulated. The holes are about 5 cm oversized, and with the insulation it's a perfectly tight fit. We fixed them in place with some expanding foam from the outside, while trying to also get some foam between the wall and insulation. Cut off the excess and mount the end pieces. Then we brought in all the pipes to hook up the workshops. We have 250 mm and 200 mm pipes. First of all, a little bit of nonsense.
Wir haben ja gerade Fasching, gell?
Ich habe noch kein Kostüm. Jetzt schon.
A laser high up showed us the upper installation height, but we also double-checked that all wiring is above that. The biggest problem was where to begin, which then was the first hole into Stefan's studio. To make that nice and accurate, I made a router template. First removing most of it with the jigsaw, then the insulation. The template screws against the wall, and then a flush trim router bit. Perfect. And I can also drill the center hole for the other side. Then the same again, and the holes are perfectly in line. We also put some foam rubber around the holes to insulate against vibrations from the pipes, assembled the first section on the floor, and put it up. Making all the holes first seemed like a good idea, so I continued with the next one into Robin's shop. And then the ones into mine. Installing the pipes is pretty easy. They just slide together and we fix them to the OSB walls with big pipe clamps. Cutting the pipes to length was also straightforward with the angle grinder, and deburring the sharp edges worked great with the mini belt sander. It's also a really good light show. Unfortunately, there's one spot where some heating pipes cross the ducting. A simple problem for a 3D printer.
Da ist das hier.
And it looks a little bit like pants, so just for the fun of it, we gave it a thong. The question is, who sponsored the thong? Robin, Stefan, or me? Take your guess in the comments.
Whoever it was, it's pretty cool and definitely unique.
The rest of the installation was pretty easy, so just enjoy the clips.
Ihr müsst jetzt so Herz zappen.
Finally, we screwed everything together, grounded the ducts, and it's done. Let's switch it on. Of course, we also had to do a smoke test.
Yeah, man.
And that's our ventilation system pretty much finished. The upper pipe is bad air, the lower pipe is fresh air. Here, bad air branches off into Stefan's shop. Both continue around the corner here. Right here, fresh air branches off into Stefan's shop. Bad air branches here. This way it continues into my shop and to whatever future extension maybe. Around the corner, bad air connects to Robin's shop. And the fresh air goes up here and branches off here into Robin's and my shop. If we look into Stefan's shop, this is his fresh air outlet. And here is his bad air inlet. And like this, the air will kind of circulate across the room into the outlet. In Robin's shop, fresh air comes out this pipe. Bad air is all this. He connected a lot of stuff already, like his welding arm and another arm or pipe for soldering, and this as a general intake for bad air. And this arrangement in general also kind of circulates the air across the room. And then in my shop, bad air intake is here, fresh air is here, but I will still pipe it all the way back, so I will also circulate it across the shop. Since it can get dusty in my shop, I also installed another filter on my intake, so the bigger filter in the machine stays cleaner. It was used and got a new filter, of course. That was the last big job for the shop in general. We are very happy with it. The air quality is a lot better.
The final topic on the new workshop is the electrical setup, so let's have a look.
In the basement, the building is hooked up to three-phase power. Right here, what looks to be like three-phase 100 amps. From there, it routes up into this cable channel, goes along this cable channel to this wall and then up. In here, it then goes into this cabinet and splits up into the 4 meters, because in this building are 4 businesses. From here, the wiring for the other businesses routes through various other cable channels into their parts of the building and into their own breaker boxes. Ours routes into this main breaker panel.
Here are the main fuses, 35 amps, 3-phase each. That's how much we get. That's actually how much everybody gets, 35 amps, 3-phase. And as you can see, we have 5 3-phase fuses because we have 5 sub-distributions. The first one has all the breakers for stuff that was already installed before we moved in. So lighting, various outlets, water heaters in the bathroom. Basically everything that was already present in this building before we started adding and building more stuff. Also, every subdistribution has its own RCD that works for all breakers. So if one of them has a problem or a ground fault, this shuts off everything. Then the next distribution is again in the basement. Right here. Everything in here supplies our kitchen and office. So wiring goes up here. Stuff for the kitchen goes up here through the ceiling. And stuff for the office routes through these channels, then through this wall into this room, and routes up to the office right here. Wiring for the kitchen comes up behind the kitchen through the floor. So there we then have 3-phase for the stove, a breaker for the dishwasher, a breaker for the 3.5 kilowatt water heater, which needs the whole single phase, and another breaker for these outlets where the coffee maker is hooked up. So theoretically, we could fire up everything at once at full power without tripping a breaker or a fuse. That never happens, but I mean, we did things properly. And the other cable comes up into the office wall we built right about here. And there is a mini distribution for all the outlets we installed in the wall. And that's also where the networking cable is coming up, and that's hooked up here. We did it that way to have the office and kitchen completely separate from all the power of the workshop. So if anything happens in the workshop and somebody trips a fuse or whatever, the office stays on, which is kind of important because it also supplies our networking gear. Now in the workshop area, every one of us, so me, Robin, Stefan, has their own sub-distribution. In Stefan's studio, it's right here behind the door. In Robin's workshop, it is right here on the wall. And in my shop, it is there. And my one is the only one that's kind of a special one because I have woodworking machinery and produce dust. So this one has an IP54 rating for dust and water resistance. Made sense to choose that one. And along with that, all of my wall outlets are also like this with an IP44 rating, I think, as well as the light panels. So either dust-proof everything or nothing. I went with everything. And I could have shown you the entire electrical installation a long time ago, except until last week, because what's still missing are the 3-phase outlets, and I wanted to wait with those until most of the machines had their kind of final spot to keep the wiring as short as possible. For now, I will install 7 outlets, because this needs 3-phase, this needs 3-phase, this and this needs 3-phase, this needs 3-phase, and of course the new lathe needs 3-phase. And then one extra for, I don't know, a dust collection or any other future machine. There isn't really much regulation about the installation height, but one common height seems to be 1.50 meters, which is about this. And I kind of like that, so I will install all of them at this height.
I set up a crossline laser to that height.
And I align the lower outlet edge with that.
Once all outlets were mounted to the wall, I could install the cable channels, and that's actually a big part of the work. There was also one spot with a corner. Easy task for my belt sander with the miter fence.
Okay, all cable channels are mounted and prepared. So next comes wiring. And I'm not looking forward to that because I have to work with this 2.5 square millimeter 5-core cable. Super stiff and annoying to work with. At least there was one simple section.
It's also work I probably only have to do once, but especially the triple outlets were annoying because I had to feed 3 cables through them. After that, I connected them together in the little distribution boxes with Wagos.
Okay, the wiring in the little distribution boxes is done. The actual wiring of the outlets and the wiring to the circuit breakers inside here I will have done professionally. I just left the cables long enough as I was told. Now everything's hooked up. I have 4 16-amp 3-phase breakers. The first one supplies this and this outlet. The next one, these two. The third one, these two next to each other. And the fourth one, just this one. And that's where the lathe is hooked up because it has its own breaker. With that, I have enough outlets to hook up every machine and even have one spare for expansion. And in terms of standard 220 volt outlets, I think I have 12 pairs in here, so 24 outlets. That should be enough. Okay, and now leaving my shop again, we have one more sub-distribution outside the 3 shops, right here. And that supplies our ventilation system and all the outlets outside the shops in the new walls. And we wanted that so none of us has breakers that don't correspond to outlets in their own room. And it also meant we only had to run one big wire through the channel to this distribution and not a lot of small wires from any distribution inside another room. What you maybe also noticed, we don't have individual meters in our distribution boxes because we have roughly the same power requirements each. We talked about this before. We were okay with just splitting the bill equally so everybody pays the same for power. And that wraps up the entire electrical installation and the whole video. Man, about 4 months of work crammed into a 2-hour long video. What a journey!